Long before the first Greek ship ever cut through the waters of the Aegean on its way to Troy, before heroes like Achilles and Hector became legends whispered across centuries, before cities burned and kings fell, the chain of events that would ignite the Trojan War began somewhere far quieter, a TA wedding. Not a battlefield, not a throne room, but a celebration. The wedding of King Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis was meant to be one of the grandest celebrations the ancient world had ever seen. Every powerful god of Olympus had gathered for the occasion. Zeus himself presided over the feast. Athena stood among the guests in her gleaming armor. Apollo played music that echoed across the mountains, and the halls were filled with laughter, wine, and divine pride. For mortals, such a gathering would have been unimaginable. The rulers of the universe themselves had come together in peace. But there was one goddess who had not been invited, and leaving her out would prove to be the worst mistake anyone could make. Her name was Eris, the goddess of discord. Wherever she walked, arguments followed. Where she whispered, alliances collapsed. She was not simply fond of chaos. She was chaos itself, as though the gods had made a decision. They would simply not invite her. For a while, it seemed like the plan had worked. The celebration continued. Wine flowed. Songs filled the halls. The gods laughed together in a rare moment of harmony. Until suddenly, without warning, Eris appeared. She did not shout. She did not curse. Instead, she simply smiled. In her hand, she held a single golden apple. The fruit glittered in the firelight, its surface perfectly polished. And carved into the gold were 4 simple words: to the fairest. Eris tossed the apple casually into the crowd of goddesses. Then she vanished. For a moment, no one spoke. Then 3 goddesses stepped forward. Each of them believed the apple belonged to her. The first was Hera, queen of the gods, wife of Zeus, ruler of Olympus. She was powerful, regal, commanding. If anyone deserved to be called the fairest, she believed it was the queen of heaven herself. The second was Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Born fully grown from Zeus's own head, she embodied intelligence, strategy, and disciplined strength. To her, beauty was not only appearance, it was brilliance, power, perfection of mind. And the third was Aphrodite, the goddess of love out of desired, of irresistible beauty. Aphrodite. The answer was obvious. Beauty was her domain. Her power shaped the hearts of gods and mortals alike. The apple belonged to her. None of the 3 would give up their claim. The celebration slowly transformed into something else entirely, a divine argument, a dangerous one, because these were not ordinary rivals. These were 3 of the most powerful beings in existence. And if Zeus chose one, the other 2 would never forget. Zeus did something clever he refused to judge. Instead, he chose someone else, someone mortal, someone far away from Olympus, a young man who at that very moment was tending sheep on a quiet mountain far from royal courts and divine politics. His name was Paris, and he had no idea the fate of entire civilizations was about to rest in his hands. But Paris himself had been marked by destiny long before the goddesses ever arrived. Before he was born, his mother, Queen Hecuba of Troy, had a dream that, in the dream, she gave birth not to a child, but to a burning torch. The flames spread across the city of Troy, devouring towers, temples, homes, until the entire city vanished in fire. When the royal prophets heard this dream, their interpretation was immediate and terrifying. The child she carried would one day destroy Troy. King Priam, ruler of Troy, faced an impossible decision. If the prophecy was true, allowing the child to live meant risking the destruction of everything he ruled: the throne, the city, his people. When the baby boy was born, Priam ordered him killed. But when the moment came, the king could not do it. Instead, he handed the infant to a shepherd named Achilles and gave him a different order. Take the child to Mount Ida. Leave him there. Let nature decide his fate. Achilles carried the newborn high into the mountains. Wind swept across the rocky slopes, and the forests echoed with the sounds of wild animals. No child could survive there. He placed the baby on the ground and walked away. But something strange happened. 5 days later, the shepherd returned. He expected silence. He expected death. Instead, he found a child alive. Even stranger, a she-bear stood nearby. The animal had been nursing the baby. Somehow, impossibly, the infant had survived. Agillos stared in disbelief at him. This could only mean one thing. The gods had spared the child. So he picked the baby up and carried him home. He raised him as his own son and gave him a name. Paris. Paris grew up among shepherds on the slopes of Mount Ida. He knew nothing of kings or prophecies. His world was the mountains, the forests, the animals he cared for. But even there, people began to notice something unusual about him. He was extraordinarily handsome, strikingly so. And more than that, he had a reputation for fairness. Whenever the shepherds argued over animals or land or trade, they often asked Paris to decide the matter. And somehow, his judgments always felt right, balanced, just. The young shepherd had unknowingly built a reputation, one that eventually reached even the ears of the gods. So, when Zeus needed someone to judge the beauty contest between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, he chose the shepherd prince of Mount Ida. One quiet afternoon, as Paris watched his sheep wander across the hillside, a figure appeared before him but a god. Hermes, messenger of Olympus, and behind him, 3 goddesses whose presence made the air itself feel electric. Paris had been asked to judge which of them was the most beautiful, but what seemed like a simple choice would soon become the most dangerous decision any mortal had ever made. And before the sun set on Mount Ida, Paris would unknowingly set the Trojan War into motion. Paris stood frozen on the slopes of Mount Ida. The sheep around him wandered quietly through the grass, unaware that something extraordinary had just happened. A moment earlier, he had been alone with the wind and the distant sound of bells tied to the animals' necks. Now the air itself seemed charged with something far greater than the mountain. Before him stood Hermes, messenger of the gods, his winged sandals barely touching the earth. And behind Hermes stood 3 figures whose presence made the sunlight feel brighter and the shadows deeper. Even without being told who they were, Paris understood immediately. These were not mortals. These were goddesses. Hera stepped forward first. She carried herself with the effortless authority of someone who ruled the heavens. Her crown gleamed softly, and her eyes held the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to obedience. Even the air seemed to bend around her presence. Beside her stood Athena. Where Hera radiated royal power, Athena radiated something sharper: intelligence, discipline, calculation. Her armor shone with a cold brilliance, and her gray eyes studied Paris carefully, as if measuring his worth before he had even spoken. And then there was Aphrodite. She did not wear armor. She did not need a crown. Her beauty alone was overwhelming. It felt less like looking at a person and more like witnessing a force of nature. Her presence stirred something in the heart that was impossible to ignore. Longing, fascination, a pull deeper than logic. Paris swallowed. Hermes spoke calmly. "You have been chosen by Zeus," he said, "to judge a contest among the goddesses. Each claims to be the fairest. You must decide who deserves the golden apple." Hermes held out the apple, its surface glowing softly in the sunlight. Paris stared at it, a shepherd, a simple man from the mountains. And now he was supposed to judge the beauty of 3 divine beings. For a moment, he said nothing. He knew enough about the gods to understand the danger. No matter what he decided, 2 goddesses would leave unhappy, and angering a god rarely ended well for mortals. But Zeus had commanded it. There was no refusing. The goddesses understood this as well. And so, slowly, the contest began to change. Instead of simply presenting their beauty, each goddess began to make an offer. Hera spoke first. Her voice carried the calm weight of someone used to ruling. "Choose me," she said, "and I will make you the most powerful man alive. I will grant you dominion over all of Asia and Europe. Kings will bow before you. Nations will obey your command. You will rule an empire greater than any the world has ever seen." Paris felt the words sink deep into his mind. Power, not just wealth, not just fame, but absolute authority. the kind of power that reshapes the world. Then Athena stepped forward. Her voice was colder, sharper. "Choose me," she said, "and I will give you victory in every battle you ever fight. No enemy will defeat you. I will grant you wisdom beyond all other men and skill in war that will make your name legendary. You will be remembered as the greatest warrior who ever lived." Paris imagined it. Endless victories, songs sung about his triumphs that a reputation that would live forever. Then Aphrodite moved forward. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she simply looked at Paris. The world seemed to grow strangely quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than the others, but somehow more powerful. "Choose me," she said gently, "and I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris blinked. Compared to empires and eternal victory in battle, it sounded almost small, but Aphrodite continued. "Her name is Helen," she said, "the most beautiful woman who has ever lived." Paris had heard the name before. Everyone had. Helen of Sparta. Her beauty was legendary across the Greek world. Kings had traveled great distances simply to ask for her hand in marriage. But Aphrodite's voice grew quieter. "She will love you," the goddess said. "Truly love you." Paris stood there in silence. Point 3 offers point 3 futures. Power beyond imagination. Unstoppable military glory. Or the love of the most beautiful woman alive. To Paris. Raised among shepherds far from royal politics, the first two offers felt distant. Abstract. The dreams of kings and generals. But the third, it felt human. Real, love, desire, passion. And somewhere deep inside him, Paris believed something else too. He believed that a man who could win the love of the most beautiful woman in the world must himself be extraordinary. The decision formed slowly in his mind. Then finally, Paris lifted the golden apple and placed it in Aphrodite's hands. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the goddess of love smiled, a quiet, victorious smile. Hera's face hardened. Immediately, Athena's gray eyes narrowed. Neither goddess said a word, but their anger was unmistakable. They turned away without speaking. From that moment forward, both Hera and Athena would hate Troy. They would support its enemies, and one day, their resentment would help burn the city to the ground. But Paris did not understand that why etto him. It seemed like the matter had simply ended. Aphrodite touched his shoulder gently. "You have chosen well," she said, "and I will keep my promise." Then the goddesses vanished. Hermes disappeared with them. And suddenly Paris was alone again on the mountain. The sheep grazed quietly. The wind moved through the grass. It was as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed because somewhere far away in the city of Sparta lived a queen named Helen, a woman whose beauty had already shaped the fate of kings. And soon, Paris of Troy would meet her. And when he did, the world would begin moving toward war. Far from the quiet slopes of Mount Ida, far from the shepherd who had just judged the goddesses, another story had already been unfolding for years, a story centered around a single woman. Her name was Helen. Long before Paris ever heard her name from Aphrodite, Helen's beauty had already begun reshaping the political landscape of the Greek world. But Helen's story began with something even stranger than beauty. That it began with the king of the gods himself. According to the most famous tradition, Zeus had become fascinated by a mortal queen named Leda, the wife of the Spartan king Tyndareus. Zeus, who was never known for resisting his desires, decided to approach her not as a god, but in disguise. He took the form of a swan. One quiet evening near the banks of a river, Leda encountered the strange creature seeking refuge in her arms, as if fleeing some unseen danger. The moment felt almost magical, otherworldly. From that encounter, the legends say, Leda later laid 2 eggs. From those eggs were born 4 children. Among them was Helen. From the moment she was young, it became clear that she was unlike anyone else in the world. Her beauty was not simply striking, that it was almost supernatural. People who saw her struggled to describe it. Poets later said that her face seemed to contain the harmony of the heavens themselves. Her presence could command attention in any room, No matter who else stood there, be by the time she reached adulthood, word of her beauty had spread across all of Greece. Kings began arriving in Sparta. Princes, warriors, leaders of powerful kingdoms, each hoping to marry Helen, and with her secure an alliance with Sparta. The list of suitors grew enormous. Some of the greatest names of the age gathered under King Tyndareus' roof. There was Ajax of Salamis, towering like a giant among men. There was Diomedes of Argos, young but already famous for his skill in battle. There was Idomeneus of Crete, ruler of a powerful island kingdom. There were dozens more, lords and princes whose armies filled entire regions of Greece, and among them were two brothers whose influence stretched further than any others, Agamemnon and Menelaus, the sons of a powerful royal house that ruled from the city of Mycenae. Agamemnon, the elder, was already becoming the most powerful king in the Greek world. Menelaus, his younger brother, was strong, wealthy, and respected among the Greek nobles. The gathering of so many powerful men created a dangerous problem, because Helen could only marry one of them, and rejecting the others could spark a war before a wedding even happened. King Tyndareus understood the danger. If he chose the wrong man, the rest might unite against Sparta. Or worse, they might simply try to take Helen by force. The situation threatened to turn the entire Greek world into chaos. That was when one of the suitors stepped forward with an idea, a man known not for brute strength, but for his mind. His name was Odysseus, king of the small island kingdom of Ithaca. Odysseus understood something important. These men were warriors, they respected honor, and they feared the anger of the gods. He proposed a solution. Before Helen chose her husband, every suitor would swear a sacred oath. Each man would promise that he would respect Helen's decision, and more importantly, if anyone ever tried to steal her away from her husband, every single one of them would unite to defend the marriage. It was a brilliant solution. No man would dare break a sacred oath sworn before the gods, and if someone did attempt to abduct Helen, they would face the combined armies of Greece. King Tyndareus immediately accepted the idea that a great sacrifice was prepared and a horse was slaughtered, and its pieces were laid out for the ritual point one by one. Each prince stepped forward. They placed their hands upon the sacrifice, and they swore the oath of Tyndareus, that a promise that would bind their fates together. None of them realized it yet, but they had just created the alliance that would one day attack Troy. After the oath was sworn, Helen was finally allowed to choose her husband. Among all the kings and warriors gathered there, she chose Menelaus. The decision made sense politically. Menelaus was powerful, but not threatening enough to dominate the other kings. His brother Agamemnon's influence added stability, and the marriage would strengthen Sparta without creating dangerous rivalries. Soon after, Helen and Menelaus were married. Their union seemed strong. They ruled together in Sparta, and their palace became a center of diplomacy and trade. Visitors arrived constantly. Merchants, envoys, travelers from distant kingdoms. For nearly 10 years, peace held. The oath worked. The suitors returned to their kingdoms, married other women, and continued ruling their lands. The memory of Helen's marriage faded into the background of Greek politics, until one day, a visitor arrived in Sparta, a prince from the distant city of Troy, a man whose destiny had begun years earlier on a mountain. His name was Paris, and the moment he stepped into the palace, Aphrodite's promise began to unfold. The road from Troy to Sparta was long. It crossed seas that had carried traders and sailors for centuries, past islands dotted with fishing villages and temples, and moved through waters where merchant ships traveled between the kingdoms of the Mediterranean world. For Paris, the journey was more than a simple diplomatic mission. It was the beginning of a promise made by a goddess. Since the day on Mount Ida when he handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, the memory had never fully left him. The moment had felt unreal even while it was happening. 3 goddesses standing before him, offering futures greater than any mortal could imagine. He could have ruled continents. He could have become the greatest warrior alive. But instead, he had chosen love, and Aphrodite had promised him Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Now his ship cut through the blue waters of the Aegean, its sail filled with steady wind as Troy faded behind him and the Greek world slowly drew nearer. Paris traveled not as a conqueror or an adventurer, he came as an ambassador. His father, King Priam of Troy, had officially recognized him years earlier after his true identity was discovered. The shepherd boy raised on Mount Ida had proven himself during athletic competitions in the city, defeating noble-born warriors with ease, his strength, his beauty, his natural confidence. All of it eventually led Priam to realize the truth, that this young man was the abandoned prince he had once ordered left to die. Paris had been welcomed back into the royal family, given a place in the palace, and entrusted with diplomatic duties. As Troy's influence expanded across the eastern Mediterranean, Priam needed envoys who could represent the city with intelligence and grace. Paris was perfect for it, but beneath the official mission, another purpose moved quietly. Aphrodite's promise waited. The city of Sparta appeared on the horizon after many days at sea. Unlike the wealthy trading cities of Asia Minor, Sparta possessed a harder, more disciplined character. The land around it was rugged, shaped by mountains and valleys that produced warriors known across Greece. But the palace of Menelaus, king of Sparta, still carried the elegance expected of a royal court. When Paris arrived, he was welcomed with full honors. Ancient Greek culture held hospitality as a sacred duty to a guest. Even a stranger was placed under the protection of the gods, especially Zeus Xenios, guardian of hospitality. To mistreat a guest was considered a terrible offense that could bring divine punishment. As Menelaus greeted Paris warmly. Feasts were prepared, wine flowed. Musicians filled the halls with song. Paris was given a place of honor at the king's table, treated not simply as a visitor, but as a respected nobleman from a powerful city. Tea first. Everything followed the normal rhythms of diplomacy. Conversations about trade, talk of alliances, stories exchanged between kingdoms. But then, Paris saw her. Helen entered the great hall quietly. Yet the moment she appeared, the entire room seemed to change. Even surrounded by royalty, she stood apart. It was not only her beauty, though that alone could have silenced the room. It was something more difficult to describe than a presence, an elegance that felt almost divine. Paris understood immediately that Aphrodite had not exaggerated. Helen truly was the most beautiful woman alive. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the hall. Neither spoke, but something passed between them. Something subtle, something powerful. Aphrodite was watching. The goddess had not forgotten her promise, and now she began to weave it into reality. Their first conversations were simple, polite, the sort of discussions expected between a royal guest and the queen of the palace. Helen asked about Troy. Paris described the city, its massive walls, its towers rising above the plains. The busy harbor filled with ships from distant lands that he spoke about Mount Ida, about the forests and rivers of his childhood. Helen listened with fascination. Her life in Sparta had been stable, respectable, even comfortable. But it was also predictable. The routines of court, the endless responsibilities of a queen. Paris brought stories of a different world, that a world across the sea, that a world filled with mystery and possibility. And slowly, conversation turned into something more. They spent time walking in the palace gardens, talking beneath shaded columns, watching the sunset from the palace walls as ships moved across the distant sea. Neither fully understood what was happening. They simply felt drawn toward each other. But Aphrodite understood perfectly. She nudged their emotions gently, at a glance that lingered too long, at a moment of silence filled with unspoken thoughts. The goddess did not force their love. She simply opened the door and let their hearts walk through it. Days passed, then weeks. Paris remained in Sparta as an honored guest, and the bond between him and Helen grew stronger. But fate soon presented the opportunity that would change everything. One morning, news arrived at the palace. Menelaus had to travel. His grandfather had died on the island of Crete, and as a member of the royal family, he was required to attend the funeral rites. The journey would take time, but he would be gone for several days. Before leaving, Menelaus entrusted Paris to Helen's care. A simple gesture of hospitality. He asked her to ensure their guest remained comfortable during his absence, that he could not possibly imagine the consequences of that decision. The moment Menelaus's ship disappeared beyond the horizon, the balance of the palace shifted. The king was gone, Paris remained, and the goddess of love continued her quiet work. The final conversations between Paris and Helen carried a different tone now. The formality of diplomacy faded. Emotion replaced it. Paris spoke openly about the promise Aphrodite had made to him. Helen listened, half amazed, half afraid. Leaving Sparta would mean abandoning everything she had known, her husband, her daughter. Her homeland it would also mean breaking the sacred marriage that had once united the kings of Greece. But the pull between them had grown too powerful to ignore. Love, whether natural or guided by divine hands, can make even the wisest decisions seem small. And so, one night, Helen made a choice. She would leave with Paris, but their departure was not simple. Helen did not walk away with nothing. She took treasures from the palace, gold, silver, precious fabrics, and other valuables that represented enormous wealth. Whether this was done willingly or encouraged by Paris, the ancient stories never fully agree. But the result was the same. What might have been seen as a romantic escape now also looked like a theft, a diplomatic insult, a violation of hospitality. Before dawn, ships were prepared. The harbor was quiet, the sea calm. Paris and Helen boarded the vessel together. The sails rose slowly into the early morning wind, and Sparta faded behind them. But they did not sail directly to Troy. Their journey stretched across the Mediterranean. They stopped in distant lands, traveled along foreign coasts. Some say they visited Egypt. Others claim storms forced them to take long detours. Whatever the truth, the journey bought them time. Time for news to spread. Time for kings across Greece to hear the story. And when Menelaus finally returned to Sparta, he found the palace empty. Helen was gone. Paris was gone. The treasure was gone. T first there was disbelief, then anger, then something far more dangerous, because Menelaus suddenly remembered something every king of Greece had once sworn: the oath of Tyndareus, a sacred promise made years earlier. Every suitor of Helen had sworn to defend her marriage, to unite against anyone who tried to steal her away. Menelaus stood in the palace halls, staring at the empty spaces where Helen's treasures once rested. This was no longer a private heartbreak. This was a broken oath that a challenge, an insult to every king in Greece. And there was only one man powerful enough to gather them all. Menelaus sent a messenger to his brother, the ruler of Mycenae, the most powerful king in the Greek world, Agamemnon. And soon, the kings of Greece would begin gathering for war. When Menelaus returned to Sparta and learned that Helen had vanished with Paris of Troy, the shock moved through the palace like a cold wind. Servants spoke in whispers. Guards searched the harbor again and again, as if the ships might somehow still be there. And the king himself walked through the empty chambers where Helen once lived, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. But grief did not remain the dominant feeling for long, because anger soon replaced it, and behind that anger stood something even more powerful than personal humiliation. Years earlier, the kings and princes of Greece had sworn the oath of Tyndareus, a promise made before the gods themselves that whoever married Helen would be protected by all the others. At the time, the oath had seemed like a clever diplomatic solution to prevent conflict among the suitors. But now it became something else entirely. Now it was a call to war. Menelaus did not hesitate. The insult was too great, the violation of hospitality too clear, and the theft of Helen and the royal treasure too blatant to ignore. But he knew that Sparta alone could not march against a city as powerful as Troy, whose massive walls and strategic position had made it one of the richest kingdoms in the eastern Mediterranean. If Helen was to be returned, if justice was to be done, then the entire Greek world would need to stand together. So Menelaus traveled north to the mighty citadel of Mycenae, where his older brother Agamemnon ruled behind walls so enormous that later generations would call them the work of giants. Agamemnon listened carefully as Menelaus told the story, and while he showed the expected outrage at the insult to his brother, his thoughts were already moving beyond family loyalty. The opportunity before him was enormous. A united Greek expedition against Troy could bring glory, wealth, and influence greater than anything any Greek king had ever achieved. Troy controlled the narrow passage between the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea, a choke point through which vast amounts of trade flowed every year. If Troy fell, the Greeks could control those routes themselves. The war could reshape the balance of power across the entire Mediterranean. Agamemnon made his decision quickly. Messengers were sent across the Greek world carrying reminders of the sacred oaths sworn years earlier in Sparta. Kings who had long returned to their own kingdoms, men who had almost forgotten the promise they once made, suddenly found themselves bound again by the words they had spoken before the gods. Ships had to be prepared, warriors gathered, alliances activated. Some kings accepted their duty eagerly, seeing the expedition as a chance for glory and plunder. Others were far less enthusiastic. A campaign against Troy could last years, perhaps decades, and would cost enormous amounts of wealth and lives. But the oath had been sworn before the gods, and breaking such a promise risked divine punishment. Slowly, kingdom by kingdom, the Greek world began to prepare for War Point. One of the most famous attempts to avoid the oath came from Odysseus, the clever king of Ithaca. When Agamemnon's envoys arrived at his palace to summon him to the expedition, Odysseus pretended to have lost his mind. He yoked a horse and an ox together, an absurd pairing, and began plowing his fields while scattering salt across the soil, behaving like a man who had completely abandoned reason. The ruse might have worked if the envoys had not suspected deception. One of them placed Odysseus's infant son Telemachus directly in front of the plow. At the last moment, Odysseus swerved to avoid harming the child, revealing that his mind was perfectly sound. The trick exposed, Odysseus sighed and accepted that there was no escape from the oath. He would go to Troy with the others, though even then he was already calculating the dangers and opportunities the war would bring. Recruiting another warrior proved even more important and far more difficult. Achilles, son of the hero Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis, was already known throughout Greece as the greatest fighter of his generation, even though he was still young. His mother had received a prophecy about his future, a prophecy that haunted both of them. Achilles had two possible destinies. If he stayed home, he would live a long and peaceful life, but his name would eventually fade from memory. If he sailed to Troy, he would win immortal glory but die young on the battlefield. Knowing this, Thetis tried to hide her son from the recruiters by disguising him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Skyros. Achilles lived there dressed as a girl, hoping the war might pass him by. But Odysseus, now committed to the expedition despite his earlier reluctance, devised a clever test. He arrived at the palace disguised as a merchant carrying gifts for the king's daughters, spreading jewelry and fine clothing across the floor. Among the items, he also placed a shield and spear. When a trumpet suddenly sounded the alarm of an imaginary attack, the young women screamed and fled, but one figure instinctively reached for the weapons. Achilles had revealed himself. Realizing the deception was finished, he agreed to join the expedition, choosing the path of glory even though it meant accepting his own early death. As the months passed, the coalition grew larger. Ajax the Greater arrived from the island of Salamis, towering over other warriors like a living fortress with his massive shield of layered oxhide reinforced with bronze. Diomedes of Argos joined with his seasoned army, bringing not only strength but also a reputation for daring battlefield tactics. Nestor of Pylos, old but wise, came as a counselor whose experience in earlier wars made him invaluable to the younger kings. Contingents arrived from Crete, Thessaly, Arcadia, and dozens of smaller kingdoms whose rulers feared both the oath and the political consequences of refusing Agamemnon's call. Each kingdom brought ships, warriors, horses, armor, and supplies. The coalition that slowly formed was unlike anything Greece had ever seen. Finally, the gathering point was chosen: the harbor of Aulis on the eastern coast of Boeotia. There, ship after ship arrived until the sea seemed crowded with masts and sails. Ancient tradition would later say that more than 1,000 ships gathered there, each carrying warriors eager, or at least resigned, to march toward Troy. Camps spread across the nearby plains as tens of thousands of men prepared for the greatest expedition in Greek memory. Priests conducted sacrifices to ask the gods for favorable winds and victory. Armorers hammered bronze into shape. Chariots were repaired. Commanders debated strategy late into the night. Yet even in that moment of unity, there were tensions beneath the surface. Each king commanded his own army and guarded his own pride. Agamemnon might lead the expedition, but the coalition was fragile, held together by oaths, ambition, and the promise of shared victory. And while the Greeks prepared for war, far across the sea the city of Troy continued its daily life behind towering walls that had stood for generations. King Priam ruled wisely. Hector trained the city's warriors, and Paris lived within the palace beside Helen, the woman whose beauty had now drawn the entire Greek world into motion. Neither side could yet see the full scale of what was coming. But slowly, like storm clouds gathering over the sea, the war began to form. The ships waited at Aulis, their bronze prows ready to cut across the Aegean toward the Trojan coast. The kings had answered the oath. The heroes had chosen glory over safety. The greatest army the ancient world had ever seen was finally ready to sail toward Troy, where destiny, prophecy, and pride would collide in a conflict that would echo through history for thousands of years. The rain had been falling since sunset, turning the forest paths into dark rivers of mud. Thunder rolled above the mountains like distant drums of war. Inside a narrow stone cave, the small fire crackled weakly as wind pushed cold air through the entrance. The young wanderer sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. His cloak was soaked from the storm outside. Across from him sat the old traveler, the mysterious man he had met earlier on the road. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of rain and thunder filled the silence. Finally, the young wanderer said quietly, "Why are you helping me?" The old traveler looked up slowly because, he said, "You remind me of someone." "Who?" The old traveler did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal pendant. It glowed faintly in the firelight. The young wanderer leaned forward. "That symbol," he whispered. "Where did you get it?" The old traveler studied him carefully. "You recognize it." The young wanderer hesitated. "Yes." "Then tell me what it means." The fire popped loudly as a log cracked. The young wanderer took a slow breath. "It belongs to the Order of the North." The old traveler's eyes narrowed slightly. "Few people know that name anymore. My father did." The words hung in the air like a secret finally spoken. The old traveler slowly leaned back. "So," he murmured, "you are his son." The young wanderer froze. "You knew him?" A flash of lightning illuminated the cave. For a moment, the old traveler looked older than before, his face heavy with memories. "Yes," he said quietly. "I knew him very well." The wanderer's heart began to race. "Then tell me what happened to him." Outside, thunder crashed again. The old traveler stared into the fire. "Your father was one of the bravest men I ever met," he began. "But bravery alone does not defeat darkness." "What darkness?" The old traveler looked toward the cave entrance, as if expecting someone to appear in the storm. "There are forces in this world that most people never see," he said. "Hidden wars. Silent enemies." "You mean the Shadow King?" The old traveler's eyes snapped back to the young wanderer. "So you have heard the stories. They're not just stories, are they?" The old traveler shook his head slowly. "No, they are warnings." The wind howled through the cave entrance. "Your father," the old traveler continued, "stood against the Shadow King many years ago, and lost." The old traveler looked at him carefully. "Not exactly." The young wanderer frowned. "What does that mean?" The old traveler leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It means the war never ended." Lightning flashed again at that exact moment. A sound came from outside the cave. Not thunder, footsteps, heavy, slow, crunching through wet gravel. Both men turned toward the cave entrance. Another step, then another. The young wanderer's hand moved toward the dagger at his belt. "Did you hear that?" The old traveler nodded once. "Yes." The footsteps stopped just outside the cave. A dark shape appeared in the rain, tall, unmoving, watching. The fire flickered violently as wind rushed into the cave. The young wanderer whispered, "Who is that?" The old traveler's voice dropped to almost a whisper, "Someone who should not have found us." The figure stepped forward into the firelight, and the young wanderer felt his blood run cold, because the man standing there wore the armor of the Shadow King, and in his hand he held a sword glowing with the same symbol as the pendant. The rain roared outside the cave like 1,000 whispering voices. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly turning the night into pale daylight. The armored figure stepped fully into the cave. Water dripped from the edges of his dark cloak. His armor was black as midnight, smooth and cold, with faint silver lines running across the metal like veins. The strange symbol on his chest plate glowed faintly, the same symbol as the pendant in the old traveler's hand. The young wanderer slowly stood up. His hand tightened around the dagger at his belt. The Shadow Knight removed his helmet. He was not old, not much older than the wanderer himself. But his eyes were wrong. They were empty, cold and distant, like someone who had stared into darkness for far too long. The cave fell silent. The knight spoke first. "I wondered how long it would take to find you." The young wanderer frowned. "Find me?" The knight's gaze moved slowly from the wanderer to the old traveler. "Both of you." The old traveler did not move. His voice remained calm. "You shouldn't be here." The knight tilted his head slightly. "And yet I am." Thunder shook the mountains. The young wanderer glanced between them. "You two know each other?" The knight gave a faint smile. "Oh yes." The old traveler sighed quietly, as if something long expected had finally arrived. "I was hoping we had more time." The knight stepped closer to the fire. The glow of the flames reflected off his armor. "You always hope for time," he said. "That was always your weakness." The wanderer felt tension rising in the air like a storm about to break. "What is going on?" he demanded. Neither man answered immediately. Instead, the knight looked directly at the wanderer. "Do you know who he really is?" The wanderer glanced at the old traveler. "He's the one who saved me on the road." The knight laughed softly. "Saved you?" He looked back at the old traveler. "That's a generous version of the story." The wanderer felt something twist in his chest. "What do you mean?" The knight pointed slowly toward the old traveler. "That man," his voice became colder, "was the one who betrayed your father." The words hit the cave like an explosion. The wanderer's eyes widened. "That's not true." He looked at the old traveler. "Tell him it's not true." The old traveler stared into the fire. He did not answer. The silence was worse than any lie. The wanderer's heart pounded. "You knew my father," he whispered. Still the old traveler said nothing. The Shadow Knight stepped closer. "You see," he said quietly. "He cannot deny it." The wanderer's voice shook. "Why?" The old traveler finally spoke. "It was not that simple." The knight laughed again. "It never is with you." Lightning flashed outside the cave. The wanderer turned fully toward the old traveler. "You betrayed him?" The old traveler slowly raised his eyes. There was no other way. The wanderer felt anger rising like fire in his chest. "There is always another way." The Shadow Knight shook his head. "No, not against the Shadow King." The cave fell silent again. Rain hammered against the stone outside. The knight drew his sword. The blade slid from its sheath with a cold metallic whisper. Dark energy pulsed along its edge. "You came here for something," the old traveler said calmly. "Yes." The knight lifted the sword slightly. "The boy." The wanderer's grip tightened on his dagger. "Why me?" The knight's empty eyes stared straight into his. "Because," he said quietly, "you are the last piece." The wanderer frowned. "Last piece of what?" The knight smiled faintly. "Of the key." The old traveler suddenly stood. "Enough." His voice was sharper now. "You will not take him." The knight sighed. "I was hoping you would say that." He raised the glowing sword. The fire flickered wildly. Wind rushed through the cave. For a moment, everything froze. Then, the knight attacked. His blade flashed through the air like lightning. The wanderer barely had time to react. The old traveler moved first, faster than the wanderer thought possible. Steel clashed. The sound exploded through the cave. Sparks flew as the two blades collided. The wanderer stumbled back as the fight erupted before him. The knight moved like a shadow, silent, precise, deadly. The old traveler blocked another strike, then another. Their swords clanged again and again, echoing off the stone walls. The knight twisted suddenly and kicked the old traveler backward. The old man crashed into the cave wall. The knight turned toward the wanderer. The glowing blade lifted slowly. "Well," he said calmly, "this will be easier than expected." The wanderer raised his dagger. He knew it was useless, but he refused to run. The knight stepped forward, point one step, point two. Then the old traveler shouted something in a language the wanderer had never heard before. The pendant in his hand suddenly blazed with bright light. The cave filled with blinding silver energy. The knight stopped instantly. For the first time, fear appeared in his eyes. "That power," he whispered. The old traveler stood again, holding the glowing pendant. "You should have stayed in the shadows." The knight took a slow step back. "This isn't over." "No," the old traveler said. "It's only beginning." The knight stared at the wanderer one last time. "We will meet again." Then the cave exploded with darkness. The fire went out. Wind roared through the entrance, and when the light returned, the shadow knight was gone. Only the sound of rain remained. The wanderer stood frozen. His mind racing, he slowly turned toward the old traveler. "You're going to tell me everything now." The old traveler looked exhausted. "Yes." He stared out into the storm. "Because if I don't," he paused. "He will." The rain was still falling when the cave slowly returned to silence. The fire had almost died, leaving only faint orange embers glowing on the stones. The young wanderer stood in the middle of the cave, his chest rising and falling quickly, trying to understand what had just happened. The old traveler walked toward the cave entrance and looked out into the dark forest, making sure the shadow knight was truly gone. After a long moment, he returned to the fire and carefully placed another piece of wood into the embers. Flames slowly rose again, lighting the cave with a soft glow. The wanderer crossed his arms and stared at him. "You said you would tell me everything." The old traveler nodded slowly. His face looked heavier now, as if the past he had been avoiding was finally catching up with him. "Yes," he said quietly. "You deserve the truth." The wanderer stepped closer to the fire. "Start with my father." The old traveler sat on a flat stone near the flames and rested his hands together. "Your father's name was Arlen," he began, "but most people did not know him by that name. In the Order of the North, he was known as the Shield." The wanderer frowned slightly. "The Shield?" He was the one who protected the others. When the Order fought the forces of a Shadow King, your father was always the one standing in front. The wanderer tried to imagine the man he barely remembered as a child. "You fought with him?" The old traveler nodded. "Yes. For many years." "Then why did that knight say you betrayed him?" The old traveler stared into the fire for a moment before answering. "Because that is what it looked like." The wanderer's voice sharpened. "That's not an answer." The old traveler sighed. The Order of the North was created hundreds of years ago to guard something ancient, something powerful. A relic hidden deep in the northern mountains. "What kind of relic?" "A key." The wanderer frowned. "A key to what?" The old traveler looked directly at him. "To a gate." The wanderer felt a strange chill run through his body. "What gate?" "A gate between worlds." The cave grew very quiet. "The Shadow King was once human," the old traveler continued. "Long ago he discovered the existence of that gate. He believed that beyond it there was a source of power greater than anything in this world. Power that could reshape reality itself. And the Order was guarding the key." "Yes." The wanderer slowly began to understand. "And the Shadow King wanted it." "For centuries." The flames crackled softly as the old traveler continued speaking. "Many wars were fought over that key. Many kingdoms rose and fell trying to control it. Eventually, the Order of the North became the last line of defense." The wanderer's eyes narrowed. "Where does my father fit into all this?" The old traveler's voice softened. "Your father was the strongest warrior the Order had seen in generations. When the Shadow King finally discovered the location of the relic, your father led the defense. And you were there." "Yes." The wanderer watched him carefully. "What happened?" The old traveler closed his eyes briefly as if replaying the memory. "The Shadow King did not attack alone. He brought an army of followers, warriors who had given up their souls in exchange for power. The battle lasted 3 days. By the end, most of the order was dead. The wanderer swallowed. And my father? He was still fighting. The old traveler opened his eyes again, but something went wrong. What? The key was not just an object. The wanderer leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? The old traveler pointed gently toward him. The key needed a living vessel. The wanderer's heartbeat quickened. A person? Yes. And that person was... The old traveler hesitated for a moment before answering. Yeah? The words felt unreal. That's impossible. You were only a child, the old traveler continued. But the ancient magic recognized your bloodline. The moment you were born, the relic bound itself to you. The wanderer stepped backward slowly. You're saying the key is inside me? In a way. The cave seemed smaller now, the air heavier. That's why the knight said I was the last piece. Yes. The wanderer shook his head in disbelief. Then why didn't the Shadow King take me when I was a child? Because your father stopped him. The old traveler's voice carried a quiet respect. When the Shadow King realized what you were, he tried to capture you immediately. Your father refused to let that happen. The wanderer's voice was barely a whisper. What did he do? He made a choice that changed everything. The flames reflected in the old traveler's eyes. He asked me to take you and run. The wanderer stared at him. You took me away. Yes. And he stayed behind. The old traveler nodded slowly. He knew he could not win the battle, but he believed he could buy enough time for you to escape. The wanderer felt his throat tighten, so he died fighting. The old traveler looked down. Yes. Silence filled the cave again. Rain continued to fall outside, softer now. After a moment, the wanderer spoke again. But the knight said you betrayed him. The old traveler's expression darkened. Because I did something your father did not expect. What? The old traveler looked straight at him. I destroyed the Order's stronghold. The wanderer blinked. You what? I collapsed the entire mountain fortress after you escaped. Why would you do that? To bury the gate. The wanderer slowly began to see the terrible logic. If the gate no longer existed, then the key would be useless. But that knight found me anyway. Yes. The old traveler's voice grew grim. Because the Shadow King never stopped searching, the wanderer stared into the flames, trying to process everything. So this whole time, he looked up again. I've been the thing they're hunting. Yes. The wind outside had finally begun to calm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the wanderer asked a question that had been building inside him since the beginning. If I'm the key, what happens if the Shadow King gets me? The old traveler answered quietly. He opens the gate. And then, the old traveler looked toward the darkness outside the cave. Then whatever waits beyond it comes into our world. The wanderer felt a cold weight settle in his chest. So what do? The old traveler stood slowly. We go to the only place left that might stop him. Where? The old traveler picked up the glowing pendant again. The ancient city of Alaris. The wanderer frowned. I've never heard of it. Almost no one has. He walked toward the cave entrance and looked out at the fading storm. But if the legends are true, it is the only place where the gate can be sealed forever. The wanderer stepped beside him and stared into the dark forest ahead. Then we'd better get moving. The old traveler nodded. Yes. His voice carried a quiet warning. Because the Shadow Knight will return. Far away in the forest, thunder rolled one last time. And somewhere in the darkness, something was already watching them. Morning arrived slowly over the mountains, the storm having washed the forest clean during the night. Mist drifted between the tall trees like pale smoke, and the ground was wet with rain, reflecting thin strips of early sunlight. The young wanderer and the old traveler left the cave just after dawn, moving quickly along a narrow trail that twisted through the rocky hills. Neither of them spoke much at first, because both understood that the Shadow Knight could return at any time, and every hour they spent standing still was another chance for their enemies to catch up. The wanderer kept replaying everything he had learned during the night. The idea that he carried something ancient inside him, something powerful enough to open a gate between worlds, still felt impossible. Yet the glowing pendant, the Shadow Knight's words, and the story of his father all pointed to the same truth. He was no longer just a traveler looking for answers about his past. Now he was the center of a war that had been quietly burning for centuries. After several miles, the forest began to thin and the trail climbed upward toward a high ridge overlooking a wide valley. From the top, they could see distant mountains stretching across the horizon like dark teeth rising out of the earth. Somewhere beyond those peaks, the old traveler had said, lay the hidden city of Alares. The wanderer finally broke the silence. How far is it? The old traveler studied the horizon carefully before answering. 3 days if we move quickly. Maybe 4 if the roads are dangerous. And they will be. Yes. The wanderer kicked a small stone down the slope as they continued walking. So who exactly is the Shadow Knight? The old traveler did not answer immediately. He is one of the king's chosen, he said after a moment. Warriors who surrender their freedom for power. The Shadow King gives them strength far beyond ordinary men. He didn't look much older than me. He probably isn't. The wanderer frowned. You're saying he chose that life willingly? Yes, most of them do. They descended from the ridge into another forest valley where the trees grew thicker and darker. Sunlight barely touched the ground here, and the air smelled of wet leaves and moss. Does the Shadow King have many knights like him? The wanderer asked. The old traveler's answer was quiet, more than we would like. They followed the trail for another hour before reaching an abandoned stone road partly swallowed by weeds. The old traveler stopped and crouched near the ground, examining a set of footprints pressed into the soft dirt. The wanderer watched him carefully. Someone passed through here recently. Travelers. The old traveler shook his head. Too heavy. He pointed to the marks. Armor. The wanderer's stomach tightened. You think they're looking for us already? I know they are. They moved off the road immediately and continued through the trees, choosing paths that would hide their tracks as much as possible. As the sun climbed higher, the forest slowly filled with normal sounds again. Birds calling from the branches, insects buzzing in the warm air, wind moving through leaves. But underneath it all, the wanderer felt a constant tension. Like invisible eyes were always watching, but by midday, they reached a narrow river cutting through the forest floor. The water moved quickly over smooth stones, clear and cold from the mountain snowmelt. The old traveler knelt beside it and filled a small metal flask. We'll rest here for a few minutes, he said. The wanderer sat on a fallen tree trunk and splashed water on his face. The cold helped clear his mind. There's something I still don't understand. The old traveler looked up. What? If my father knew I was the key, why didn't he destroy it? The old traveler's expression softened slightly. Because he believed the key should never be destroyed. Why not? Because if the gate is ever opened by someone else, the only way to close it again is with the key. The wanderer stared at the flowing river. So I'm both the problem and the solution. In a way, yes. Before the wanderer could respond, the old traveler suddenly raised his hand. Quiet. The forest went still. The wanderer listened carefully. At first he heard nothing except the river. Then, a faint metallic sound. Armor, moving through trees. More than one person. The old traveler stood slowly and drew a thin sword from beneath his cloak. They're closer than I expected. The wanderer grabbed his dagger. How many? The old traveler listened again. 3, maybe 4. The wanderer felt his pulse quicken. We can't fight all of them. We won't. The old traveler pointed toward a steep rocky slope rising behind them. We climb. They moved quickly, scrambling up the slope while staying low among the rocks and thick bushes. From halfway up the hill, the wanderer looked back toward the river point. 3 armored figures stepped out of the forest. Their armor was dark, though not as elaborate as the Shadow Knight's. Each carried a curved blade and wore the same strange symbol burned into their chest plates. One of them knelt near the water and examined the ground. Another looked directly toward the hill. The wanderer ducked lower. They're good trackers. Yes, the old traveler whispered. That's why we keep moving. They climbed higher until the forest below began to shrink into a wide green blanket stretching across the valley. The three soldiers remained near the river searching for tracks, unaware their targets had already slipped away. The wanderer exhaled slowly. That was close. The old traveler did not relax. It'll get worse. They reached the top of the rocky hill just as the sun began dropping toward the western mountains. From here, the view stretched for miles across forests, rivers, and distant peaks glowing orange in the evening light. The old traveler pointed toward a faint shape far on the horizon. Beyond those mountains is the desert. And after that, the ruins of Achilles. The wanderer stared into the distance. If the city is ruins, how can it help us? The old traveler's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, because beneath those ruins is the oldest gate chamber ever built. The wanderer looked at him. You mean the original gate? Yes, and that's where we can seal it forever, if we reach it before the Shadow King does. The wind moved across the high ridge as the sky slowly darkened. Far below, the three soldiers were still searching the forest, but far beyond them, deep within the distant mountains, the Shadow Knight had already begun the hunt again. Night fell quickly over the valley. The last light of the sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the forest below covered in deep shadows. The young wanderer and the old traveler continued along the high ridge, moving carefully across the uneven rocks. From up here, they could avoid the patrol searching near the river, but the path was far more dangerous. One wrong step could send them sliding down the steep cliffs. The wind had grown stronger as darkness spread across the land. It carried the cold scent of distant snow from the mountains ahead. After an hour of climbing and walking along the narrow ridge, the old traveler finally stopped near a cluster of large stones that formed a natural shelter from the wind. "We rest here," he said. The wanderer sat down heavily on the ground, his legs aching from the long day. He stared down at the valley below where small fires had appeared among the trees. "They're still looking for us." "Yes. Do you think they know where we're going?" The old traveler shook his head slightly. "Not yet. But the Shadow Knight is intelligent. He will eventually understand our destination." The wanderer leaned back against the cold rock. "And when he does, then the hunt will become much faster." The wind whistled softly through the cracks in the stone around them. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Then the wanderer asked another question that had been growing in his mind. "You said the Shadow King used to be human." "Yes. What changed him?" The old traveler took a deep breath before answering. "Power. That's it. Power that no human mind was meant to control." The wanderer frowned. "You mean the gate changed him?" "In part." The old traveler stared out into the dark distance. Many years ago, before the Order of the North even existed, a group of scholars discovered the gate hidden beneath the ruins of Achilles. At first, they believed it was simply an ancient structure built by a forgotten civilization. But it wasn't. No, what was it? The old traveler's voice lowered. A doorway built by something older than our world. The wanderer felt a chill despite the wind already cutting through the air, and the Shadow King found it. Yes, he was one of the scholars studying it. The wanderer blinked. He was a scholar? Before he became what he is now, he was considered one of the greatest minds of his time. Curious, brilliant, obsessed with understanding the unknown. So what happened? He tried to open the gate. The wind suddenly gusted across the ridge, rattling loose stones. "And it worked?" the wanderer asked. "Partially." The old traveler's eyes remained fixed on the darkness. The gate opened only a small amount, just enough for something on the other side to touch his mind. The wanderer swallowed slowly. What did he see? The old traveler shook his head. No one knows. But when the scholars found him again, he was no longer the man they had known. What was he like? Changed, powerful, and convinced that whatever existed beyond the gate was the future of the world. The wanderer rubbed his hands together to warm them. So the Order of the North was created to stop him. Yes, and now centuries later, we're still dealing with the same problem. Exactly. The wanderer stared up at the sky where thousands of stars were beginning to appear. That's a long time to chase one man. The old traveler's expression darkened. He is not truly a man anymore. Silence returned for a moment. Then the wanderer heard something, a faint sound drifting through the wind. At first he thought it was just the air moving through the rocks. But then he heard it again, Footsteps. He sat up immediately. Did you hear that? The old traveler was already standing. Yes. The sound came from the far side of the ridge, slow, steady, not trying to hide. The wanderer tightened his grip on his dagger. Please tell me that's just one of the soldiers. The old traveler did not answer. The dark figure appeared between two tall rocks at the edge of the ridge. The moonlight reflected faintly off black armor. The wanderer felt his stomach drop. The shadow knight stepped forward calmly, his long cloak moving in the wind. I must admit, the knight said evenly, I expected this chase to last longer. The old traveler drew his sword again. You should have stayed behind your soldiers. They are useful, the knight replied. But sometimes the hunter must finish the hunt himself. The wanderer stood beside the old traveler. How did you find us? The knight's cold eyes locked onto him. You carry something ancient inside you. Its presence is not as hidden as you think. The wanderer's voice hardened. You're not taking me. The knight gave a faint smile. We'll see. He slowly drew his glowing sword once more. Moonlight and dark energy shimmered along the blade. The wind howled across the ridge as the three figures faced each other in the darkness. The old traveler spoke quietly to the wanderer without looking away from the knight. If he focuses on me, run toward the eastern slope. There's a narrow pass that leads down the mountain. I'm not leaving you. You must. The shadow knight tilted his head slightly. I can't hear you. Then he moved, faster than before. His sword flashed toward the old traveler in a streak of dark light. Steel collided with steel again, sparks scattering into the night. The two fighters clashed violently on the narrow ridge, their blades ringing against each other again and again. The wanderer hesitated for only a moment. Then he saw something that changed everything. The shadow knight was stronger now, much stronger than during the fight in the cave. The old traveler barely managed to block the next strike before being forced backward across the rocks. The knight pressed forward relentlessly. You're slower than you used to be, he said calmly. The old traveler gritted his teeth as he blocked another blow. Age has its limits. The knight's next strike knocked the old traveler to one knee. The wanderer's heart pounded. He knew what the old traveler wanted him to do. Run. But instead, he picked up a heavy stone from the ground and threw it with all his strength. The rock struck the knight's helmet with a loud crack. The knight staggered slightly. Just enough, the old traveler surged forward and slammed his sword against the knight's blade, forcing him back several steps. Now, he shouted. The wanderer hesitated again, but this time he turned and ran toward the eastern slope of the ridge. Behind him, the sound of clashing steel echoed through the night. As the battle continued, he reached the narrow mountain pass and began racing down the rocky path. Wind rushed past his ears as he descended the slope, but after several minutes, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps behind him. Fast, closing the distance that a voice carried through the darkness. You cannot run forever. The wanderer glanced back. The shadow knight was already coming down the pass, and the old traveler was nowhere in sight. The narrow mountain pass was nothing but jagged rocks and shadows, and the wanderer's lungs burned with every step. The wind whipped around him, carrying the cold bite of the night and the echo of the clash he had left behind. Behind him, the relentless steps of the shadow knight followed, each strike against the stone of the mountain seeming impossibly light for someone of such bulk and armor. The wanderer's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. He had never been a fighter. He had never imagined he would be running for his life across a mountain in the dead of night while pursued by a man who was no longer human. Every instinct screamed for him to keep moving. Yet deep down, he knew running alone would not save him. Then he remembered the old traveler's words. You carry something ancient inside you. He didn't know what that meant. He had always thought of himself as ordinary, nothing special, just another soul swept into the chaos of the world. But now, as fear and adrenaline surged through him, something deep inside stirred. A warmth began in his chest and spread outward, almost like fire, almost like energy. His hands tingled, and the dagger at his belt seemed to hum faintly against his skin. The shadow knight's voice came again, echoing across the rocks. You cannot hide it. You cannot deny it. The wanderer spun around. raising his dagger, though he barely knew why. The knight advanced without hesitation, his glowing sword carving the darkness. The moonlight caught the edges of his armor, casting a spectral glow, and then it happened. The dagger in the wanderer's hand flared with light. Not a normal light, but a deep, warm, golden energy that spread along his arm, as if answering a call that had waited centuries to be heard. The Shadow Knight faltered slightly, tilting his head, sensing the change. "What is this?" the knight murmured. Almost with curiosity, almost with caution, the wanderer felt a surge of confidence and strength he had never known. His fear didn't disappear, it sharpened, but it no longer paralyzed him. The rocks beneath his feet seemed to hum with energy as he stepped forward, every movement more deliberate, more purposeful. The Shadow Knight struck, a swift arc of dark energy aimed to end the fight in a single blow. The wanderer twisted instinctively, and the dagger pulsed, meeting the strike with a force that should have been impossible. Sparks of light and shadow collided midair, filling the pass with a dazzling glow. The knight recoiled, more surprised than angry. "Interesting," he said softly. "So the legends were true. The child of the gate awakens." The wanderer didn't understand all of it, but he knew one thing. He was not powerless anymore. He was not just running. He was standing, and for the first time he felt the weight of destiny settle firmly on his shoulders. "You will not take me," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. The knight laughed softly, a sound like steel scraping stone. "We shall see. Power is only the beginning." And then, with a sudden lunge, the Shadow Knight attacked again, faster than before. The wanderer moved with the dagger glowing brighter, twisting and striking in a way he had never practiced, guided by instinct and something far older than skill. The first contact of their blades sent a shockwave down the pass, rattling stones and sending small avalanches of pebbles tumbling down the mountainside. For the first time, the wanderer realized he could fight. He could fight, and the energy inside him was more than a spark. It was something alive, something that could grow. He thrust the dagger forward, the golden light slicing the shadowy aura of the knight's sword. The knight staggered, clearly impressed, but far from defeated. "You have inherited it, but it is raw," the knight said. "Untrained, unrefined. You may survive a few battles, but not the war." The wanderer's chest heaved, and for a moment, doubt crept in. But then he remembered the old traveler's final glance at him, the unspoken trust, the belief that he could do more than just flee. He tightened his grip, felt the energy flow through him like a living force, and surged forward. Every strike, every move felt guided, almost like the mountain itself was lending him strength. His dagger met the knight's, sword with blows that sent echoes down the pass. The golden light of the dagger clashed against the black aura of the knight, illuminating the jagged cliffs and casting long, dancing shadows across the rocks. The Shadow Knight stepped back, blocking another strike, but his composure was no longer absolute. For the first time, he was forced to recognize the threat. "You may awaken," he said, voice low and dark, "but the true test lies ahead. The gate, the others, they're coming. This is only the beginning." The wanderer's mind raced. Others? The gate? He didn't have answers yet, but he did know one thing with certainty, that he would not fall here. Not now. Not while the power that had awakened inside him was still alive. He struck again. The clash lit up the mountainside like lightning, echoing across the valley below. And as the knight staggered under the force, the wanderer realized something. He was no longer just running. He was stepping into the fight he was born to face. The wind howled. The mountains shook. And somewhere in the darkness, the power inside him roared awake. The first light of dawn barely touched the peaks of the jagged mountains, but already the air was thick with tension. The wanderer's chest still burned with the power he had awakened the night before, and every muscle in his body ached from the relentless clash with the Shadow Knight. Yet there was no time to rest, no moment to catch his breath. Something beyond the mountain was calling, something ancient and vast that seemed to pull at the energy now coursing through him. He stumbled to the edge of a narrow cliff, looking down at the valley below. There, hidden between the folds of the mountains, a structure emerged that defied reason. Tall, impossible, its spires twisting toward the sky like frozen lightning. It pulsed faintly with an eerie light, a rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart. The gate. This was the place the old traveler had whispered about, the place that had haunted his dreams since childhood without him knowing why. The shadow knight appeared behind him, stepping lightly across the rocks as though the mountain itself feared him. His armor reflected the pale dawn like liquid darkness, and his eyes, those burning orbs of obsidian, fixed on the wanderer with a mixture of calculation and contempt. "You feel it, don't you?" the knight said. His voice was calm, too calm, like the stillness before a storm. "The gate awakens because of you, and with it everything changes." The wanderer's fingers tightened around the hilt of his dagger. He still didn't understand the full extent of his own power, but he could feel that it was growing, swelling within him like a tide rising before a storm. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. The knight's lips curled into something like a smile. "I want nothing that you will give willingly. But the gate demands. It does not negotiate. You were chosen long before you were born, and the path you walk now. It leads to either salvation or ruin. I am merely the first test." Before the wanderer could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, resonant hum rose from the valley, vibrating through the bones like a message sent directly into the soul. The gate's light pulsed brighter, streaks of color twisting like molten glass, and from its center, a figure emerged, cloaked in shadow, but not entirely dark. Its edges shimmered with faint silver light, as though it were being caught between worlds. The wanderer's heart skipped. He had expected the gate to be a structure, a relic, a thing to pass through. He had not expected it to guard itself, to breathe, to live. "You are the one who carries the spark," the figure said. Its voice was not a sound, but a sensation, vibrating in his mind directly. "And because of it, the world will awaken or will burn." The Shadow Knight stepped forward, raising his sword, but even he did not advance fully. The air between the three of them was charged, thick with the sense of history and destiny pressing down. "You are not ready," the knight said, a trace of unease in his tone. "None of them are ready, yet the gate calls regardless." The wanderer felt the energy inside him shift, respond, as though the gate itself recognized the spark he carried. The dagger at his side glowed brighter than ever, its light now almost a pulse in harmony with the gate. The power that had been a whisper in the night before had grown into a roar. He could feel it stretching, searching, reaching towards something greater than himself. "Then I will rise," he said, voice steady and unwavering. "I will face whatever comes. I won't run anymore." The shadowy figure regarded him for a long moment, silent, as if weighing the truth of his words. Then, without warning, it moved. Faster than thought, it descended from the gate, passing through the air like liquid silver, and the ground beneath it seemed untouched and yet trembling. "You are not alone," it said. "Others are coming. Allies, enemies. The gate's awakening will not go unnoticed. You will need guidance. You will need strength beyond the ordinary. And you will need to embrace what lies within." The Shadow Knight growled, raising his sword again. "You will not escape me. Not now. Not ever. Your power may have grown, but it is still raw, still flawed. And I am eternal." The wanderer braced himself. The dagger in his hand pulsed in resonance with the gate, with the figure, with something deep and primal inside him. His fear no longer controlled him. It was a tool, a sharp edge to hone his focus. "You will see," he said simply. "You will see that I am no longer what I was yesterday. I'm more than fear. I'm more than doubt. And I will not be stopped." With that, he surged forward, the dagger blazing like a comet in the early light, the energy flowing from the gate into him, a river of power that lifted him beyond mere human limits. The Shadow Knight met him, their clash sending shock waves across the valley, and the silver figure from the gate circled above, observing, guiding, its light mingling with the golden glow of the dagger. And in that instant, the wanderer understood. The gate was not merely a passage or a portal. It was a living test, a crucible, a harbinger of everything that was to come. He was not simply walking into battle. He was stepping into destiny itself, a current far greater than himself, where every choice, every strike, every heartbeat would ripple through the world. The mountains shivered under the weight of the awakening. The wind howled, and far below, in the shadows of the valley, something stirred, an army drawn to the gate, drawn to the spark, drawn to the clash that would decide the fate of everything. The wanderer took a deep breath, feeling the full force of the energy coursing through him, and with one resolute step, he pressed forward. There was no turning back, and so the first storm rose. The valley below had grown darker with each passing moment, not because the sun had faltered, but because something ancient had begun to stir. The wind carried whispers now, voices faint and echoing, speaking in a language older than memory itself. The wanderer could feel it in his bones. The gate had awakened, and it had not gone unnoticed. From the folds of shadow that clung to the valley's edge, figures emerged. Not one, not 10, but thousands, soldiers cloaked in darkness, their armor black as midnight, glinting with cold silver edges. Their movements were precise, synchronized, almost unnatural, as if some unseen conductor guided their every step. They did not speak, did not hesitate. Their eyes, faintly glowing red, were fixed on the gate and on the wanderer who now held the pulse of its power. The Shadow Knight's voice rang out, slicing through the tension like a sharpened blade. Behold, they have come, the army of the forgotten, those who were cast aside, those who were denied the light. They rise now, and they follow only the gate's call and mine. The wanderer's grip tightened on his dagger. The power that had surged through him at the gate now flowed like molten fire through his veins, sharpening his senses, his reflexes, his perception of the world around him. Every step the enemy took sent ripples through the air, and he could feel each movement as though it were happening inside him. "You will not win," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of certainty. "The gate's power is not yours to command. I am its spark, and it will flow through me." The silver figure from the gate hovered closer, its presence soothing yet intensely commanding. "Power alone will not protect you," it said, its voice vibrating in his mind. "Wisdom, timing, and understanding the currents of fate, these will guide you. You are the first, but not the last. Others will rise, and together, you will either shape the world or be consumed by it." A chill wind swept through the valley as the army advanced, silent yet terrifying in its cohesion. The ground beneath their feet darkened, as though the earth itself feared them. The wanderer raised his dagger, and it flared, a beacon of gold light cutting through the shadows. With a surge of energy, he leapt forward, faster than the eye could follow, colliding with the nearest soldier. The impact sent a shock wave through the ranks, and the clash of blade against armor rang like thunder. But for every soldier he struck down, two more seemed to take their place. The army was inexhaustible, relentless. The Shadow Knight moved with him, blocking attacks and striking with precision, forcing the wanderer to adapt with every swing. He realized then that brute strength would not suffice. He had to become one with the energy of the gate, to move in harmony with it, to let it guide him. As he fought, flashes of memories and visions pierced his mind. Battles long past, faces he did not recognize, cities rising and falling. He saw the origin of the gate, glimpses of the world as it was before time had recorded it, and he felt the enormity of his role within it. Each strike he made now was not merely a fight for survival. It was a statement of existence, a shaping of reality itself. The silver figure descended, landing beside him in a shimmer of light. "Focus," it said. "The army feeds on fear. Your resolve is your weapon. Do not let them see hesitation. Do not let them see doubt. Every heartbeat you own is a strike against the shadow." Drawing a deep breath, the wanderer let the energy of the gate surge through him fully. His dagger blazed brighter than ever, radiating power that cut through the darkness like sunlight through a storm cloud. Soldiers fell in waves before him, but still they came. The Shadow Knight's expression darkened. For the first time, his confidence faltered. You are stronger than I imagined, the knight hissed. But strength alone will not be enough. You will need allies, and even then, the path will be filled with fire and blood. The sound of clashing blades, the roar of power, the hum of energy from the gate, it all merged into a single symphony of chaos. And yet, amid the turmoil, the wanderer felt a clarity he had never known. He was no longer a man running from destiny. He was its herald, its spark, and through him, the tide of the world would either be turned toward light or dragged into the abyss. From the distant ridge, another figure appeared, cloaked in shifting shadows, but radiating an aura different from the army. It moved with purpose toward the wanderer. Not an enemy, not entirely, but not a friend either. The gate's awakening had drawn more than just soldiers. It had drawn those who had watched from afar, those who had waited for the spark to ignite, those who would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. The wind howled, the army pressed closer, and the first storm was no longer a warning. It had arrived. The wanderer tightened his grip, raised his dagger high, and with a yell that carried the weight of destiny itself, he surged forward into the heart of the advancing shadows, ready to meet whatever awaited him, ready to embrace the power that now defined his very being. The battle for the gate had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The figure on the ridge drew closer, gliding over the rocky terrain with an unsettling grace. Unlike the army, it made no sound, cast no shadow, yet the air around it seemed heavier, charged with an energy both foreign and familiar. The wanderer stopped, his dagger still raised, his senses straining to decipher the presence before him. Something in its movement suggested authority, experience, and perhaps judgment. As it reached the valley floor, the form resolved into a being humanoid in shape, but its features were obscured beneath a hood that shimmered like liquid night. A faint aura of shifting colors radiated from it, swirling in patterns the wanderer could not understand, as though time and space themselves bent around the figure. It raised a hand, and the army's advance faltered, as if obeying an unspoken command. "I am the Watcher," the figure intoned, its voice both everywhere and nowhere, echoing in the wanderer's mind rather than his ears. "I have observed the awakening, the stirrings of the gate. I have waited for its spark, and now I see it resides within you." The wanderer did not lower his dagger. "Why are you here? Are you friend or foe? Speak plainly." The Watcher's gaze, though hidden, seemed to pierce him. "I am neither, and yet I am both. I exist to maintain the balance the gate disrupts. Its power is not meant for any one hand, yet you have claimed it, willed it into your being. That alone makes you remarkable and dangerous." A sudden ripple passed through the army. The black-armored soldiers shifted uneasily, their synchronization faltering. The Shadow Knight's jaw tightened. "You cannot sway them," he barked. "They are mine, bound by darkness, bound by loyalty to the gate." "They are bound, yes," the Watcher replied, voice calm, resonant. "But binding alone does not create will. Your army is powerful, but you have forgotten the nature of true power. It answers to conviction, not fear. The gate itself recognizes this truth. It has chosen the spark that will guide it, and that spark is not yours to command." The wanderer's heart pounded. He felt the energy inside him quiver, respond to the Watcher's presence as though it recognized an ancient authority. The dagger in his hand flared, brighter than ever, a pure gold light cutting through the darkness, and he realized the army shadow was now twisting under his influence, wavering where once it had been unwavering. "You are learning," the Watcher said, stepping closer, the ground beneath its feet untouched by shadow or light. "But this is only the beginning. The gate was not made to be awakened lightly. There are trials yet to face, forces that will seek its destruction, and others that will seek to use it for ends far darker than any army you have encountered." The Shadow Knight took a step back, his confidence waning under the Watcher's calm authority. "You dare challenge me?" he demanded, raising his blade once more. "The gate is mine, Its power will bend the world to my will. It will bend to none, the Watcher replied. Power without purpose is destruction. You may command fear, but the gate commands destiny, and destiny does not kneel. Suddenly, the valley was bathed in a luminous cascade of energy. The gate itself pulsed, reacting to the Watcher's presence. The ground trembled, rocks lifting as though caught in a storm of invisible currents, and the army of shadows shuddered in place. Some began to fall to their knees, their glowing red eyes dimming. The Shadow Knight's scream of rage echoed across the valley as the control he had wielded so confidently slipped through his fingers. The Wanderer felt the power within him expand, not violently, but like a tide surging to fill its natural space. He felt the army's energy, the Shadow's resistance, and the Watcher's silent guidance all merging into one coherent force. He no longer needed to strike blindly. Every movement he made resonated with the gate, bending reality around him. "Are more than I anticipated," the Shadow Knight growled, now retreating a few steps. "But I'm not finished. I will claim the spark, or destroy it with the world. Then you will learn," the Watcher said, raising a hand, and the sky above the valley split with light, streaming down in shards that seemed to pierce both body and soul. "You will see what happens when destiny is opposed by the will it itself has chosen." The battle that followed was unlike any before. Light clashed with shadow, energy tore through stone, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the gate's awakening. The Wanderer moved with fluid precision, his dagger now a conduit for the gate's raw essence, slicing through shadows, deflecting attacks, and surging forward with unstoppable momentum. The Watcher's guidance was subtle but absolute, and every strike he made reshaped the battlefield, turning the army's own strength against it without a single hesitation. Amid the chaos, the Wanderer understood a terrifying truth. The gate was not merely a source of power, it was a test. Every enemy, every force, every challenge that had arisen was a part of its trial. To master it meant to confront not only the external darkness, but the darkness within himself. And as the Shadow Knight fell back, his power waning against the combined force of the Wanderer and the Watcher, a new presence began to stir beyond the ridge, unseen but palpably strong. Something older, something vast, had felt the gate awaken. Something that would not wait. The next trial was already on the horizon, and the valley, once silent, now hummed with the inevitability of destiny. The valley had barely settled after the cataclysmic clash between the Wanderer and the Shadow Knight when a tremor rolled through the earth, subtle at first, then growing into a low, resonant hum that seemed to echo through every bone. The Watcher's hooded form turned, tilting slightly, sensing the disturbance before the Wanderer even noticed it. "You feel that?" the Wanderer asked, his voice tight with anticipation, gripping his glowing dagger. What is it now?" The Watcher's hand rose slowly, and the air itself seemed to respond, the trembling growing sharper, until the very shadows that had been scattered by the battle seemed to shiver in fear. "It is older than any force you have faced," the Watcher said, voice calm yet edged with gravity. "The awakening of the gate has stirred something primordial, something that existed before the armies, before the kingdoms, before the sky itself was shaped. You have only seen the opening act. What comes now is far greater than you can yet comprehend." From the distant ridge, a ripple of darkness spread, but it was not the kind the Shadow Knight had wielded. This darkness seemed alive, not merely a void, but a force of will, twisting and writhing with intent. Trees bent, rocks splintered, and the ground cracked as though the land itself recoiled. The winds carried whispers, unintelligible at first, then slowly forming into words that gnawed at the mind. The Wanderer felt it inside him first, a creeping fear that was both external and internal, a tug at his very being. His dagger, glowing steadily with the gate's energy, seemed almost too small to hold back what was approaching. He took a deep breath, drawing on every lesson, every battle, every trial that had brought him here, and he focused. The Watcher's presence beside him was a steady anchor, a calm in the storm of approaching chaos. The shadow on the ridge coalesced into a colossal form. It towered over the mountains like a living monument, its features impossible to discern, shifting between shapes with every glance. Eyes, or what felt like eyes, opened across its form, glowing with a cold, indifferent light that seemed to pierce the soul. The valley trembled beneath its presence, and the shadows that had once been the Shadow Knight's army now scattered completely, fleeing even before being commanded. "This is it?" the Wanderer whispered, awe and fear mingling in his voice. "Yes," the Watcher replied softly, almost reverently. "The one before time, the ancient. Its awakening was always inevitable once the gate stirred. Your actions have called it forth, and now you must confront not only the darkness outside, but the darkness within yourself. Only by mastering both can the gate fulfill its purpose, and only then can this ancient be faced without succumbing to oblivion." The colossal being moved, not walking but flowing, gliding over the valley as if the ground were beneath it only by courtesy. The air thickened, charged with energy that made every hair on the Wanderer's body stand on end. It did not speak in words, yet a message penetrated directly into his mind. A challenge, a test, an accusation almost, as though it could sense every choice he had ever made. The Watcher placed a hand on the Wanderer's shoulder. "It will test you first in spirit, then in strength. The trial of courage, of truth, of purpose. Do not falter. Remember, fear is natural, but it is not your master. The gate's energy within you will guide, but you must wield it with clarity and resolve." The ground beneath them cracked violently, fissures spreading like veins, glowing faintly with the same energy as the gate. From these cracks, smaller forms began to emerge, extensions of the ancient, creatures of shadow and light intertwined, each one a fragment of the colossal force before them. They moved swiftly, silently, testing the Wanderer's reflexes, probing his resolve. With barely a pause, the Wanderer leapt into action. The dagger cut arcs of golden energy through the swarm, each strike precise, each motion flowing seamlessly into the next. The Watcher remained beside him, a silent guide, shifting subtle currents of energy to amplify his strikes. The fragments resisted, adapting with every motion, forcing the Wanderer to confront not just physical attacks, but memories, doubts, and fears projected into his mind by the ancient. Hours, or was it minutes, passed in a blur of combat and mental endurance. The valley became a storm of light and shadow, with the gate's energy binding the Wanderer, guiding him, and protecting him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Every strike he made, every obstacle he overcame, every fear he faced became part of a greater tapestry. And then, as if satisfied with his endurance, the fragments withdrew, dissolving into the fissures from which they had emerged. The colossal form of the ancient loomed above him, now still, its presence monumental, almost contemplative. The Watcher's hand remained on his shoulder. "You have survived the first trial," it said, "but the true test begins now. The gate's power will be tested against the ancient itself, and you will see that strength alone is not enough. Purpose must guide it, and conviction must carry it beyond the brink." The Wanderer steadied his breath, feeling the weight of destiny pressing on him, yet also a spark of clarity igniting within. He realized that every choice, every moment of hesitation or courage had led him to this confrontation. And now, for the first time, he felt the true potential of the gate within him, not as a weapon, but as a key. Above him, the ancient's eyes, or whatever they truly were, glowed brighter, casting the valley in alternating shadows and blinding light. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and the fate of not just the gate, but the world itself would be decided in the trials to come. The valley was no longer a place of simple earth and sky. It had transformed into something far older, far stranger, a realm suspended between reality and something beyond comprehension. The fissures glowed with the gate's energy, casting jagged shadows that danced in impossible directions. The wind had ceased entirely, yet the air itself pulsed as if alive, responding to the presence of the ancient. The colossal being hovered above, its form now more defined, yet ever shifting, faces appearing and vanishing, limbs stretching and curling in ways that defied geometry. Its eyes, countless and unblinking, fixed on the wanderer, piercing him to the core. The whispers that had accompanied its arrival now became a torrent, voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of accusation, warning, and challenge. The wanderer stepped forward, feeling the gate's energy coursing through him, steadying his pulse, sharpening his senses. He no longer feared the ancient, not in the same way he had feared the Shadow Knight. This was a test not just of strength, but of understanding. He raised his dagger, its glow intensifying until it was nearly blinding. Yet he knew that the true weapon was within him, the ability to confront not just the ancient, but himself. The Watcher floated beside him, calm as ever. "Remember," the Watcher said, voice carrying directly into his mind, "the ancient is not your enemy. It is the gate's reflection. To fight it with mere force is to fail. You must align your intent with the purpose of the gate itself. Only then can the ancient be met and understood." The ancient reacted, not with movement, but with thought, its consciousness stretching into the wanderer's mind, probing his memories, his fears, his desires. The wanderer felt every choice he had made, every hesitation, every act of courage, every betrayal, every loyalty laid bare before him. He understood now. The trial was not external. It was internal. Images flashed before him. Visions of countless lives, cities rising and falling, battles that spanned centuries. He saw the Shadow Knight, not as a villain, but as a fragment of the same force that now confronted him, corrupted by pride and fear. He saw himself, not merely as a wanderer, but as a catalyst, a conduit through which the gate's energy could either destroy or restore. Breathing deeply, he lowered his dagger slightly, feeling the glow merge with the energy around him. He reached inward, calling upon the deepest reserves of focus and clarity he had cultivated through every challenge. The ancient responded instantly, ripples of energy cascading outward, shaking the very air. Yet instead of attacking, it paused, as though waiting, testing his resolve. The fissures beneath them expanded, light flowing upward, forming a bridge of pure energy. The fragments of shadow that had earlier attacked him now rose from the ground, suspended, hovering silently around the ancient. They were not hostile. They were part of the test, extensions of the ancient's will, mirrors of his own doubts and fears. The wanderer stepped onto the bridge. Every step resonated with the pulse of the gate, his own heartbeat syncing with the energy that flowed through the valley. He extended his hand, not as a weapon, but as a gesture of alignment. The dagger's glow softened, becoming a beacon of intent rather than destruction. The ancient's countless eyes focused on that single gesture, and for a moment, the world held its breath. Then, a voice, not spoken, but understood, echoed through the wanderer's mind. "Do you accept the truth of the gate? Do you see yourself as both the challenge and the key?" "Yes," the wanderer replied, not aloud, but in total conviction. "I accept it." A wave of energy burst outward, lifting him slightly off the ground. The fragments dissolved, the fissures closed, and the ancient's form shimmered, slowly condensing into something more comprehensible. A colossal, humanoid figure, radiating power but no longer chaotic, its presence serene yet overwhelming. The Watcher nodded once, silently approving. "You have passed the trial of comprehension. The trial of force remains, but it will now be a test of unity, not conflict. The gate and the ancient are two halves of a whole, and only by working with, rather than against, this power can the path forward be secured." The ancient extended a massive arm, and the wanderer, understanding instinctively, reached forward. When their hands met, the energy of the gate surged through both of them, intertwining. The world around them seemed to dissolve. leaving only the connection. The ancient's purpose, the wanderer's resolve, and the watcher's guidance all aligned. Visions filled his mind. Histories lost, civilizations yet to come, the true potential of the gate revealed. He understood now that this power was not meant for domination, not meant for conquest, but for transformation. The ancient's awakening had been inevitable, but its guidance, its wisdom, was now in his hands. And as the energy stabilized, the valley returned to its natural form, but changed, more vibrant, more alive, as if reality itself had taken a deep, rejuvenating breath. The wanderer looked at the watcher, understanding that the journey was far from over, but that a critical step had been completed. He was no longer merely a wanderer. He was a guardian, a bridge between forces older than time, a vessel for the gate's purpose. The watcher spoke one final time, voice gentle but firm. What comes next will define not just your fate, but the fate of the world. Step forward with clarity, for the path ahead will demand all that you have learned and all that you have yet to discover. And with that, the valley's glow receded, leaving the wanderer standing alone at the center, the gate's energy pulsing softly within him, ready to guide the next stage of an adventure that had only just begun. The valley had quieted, but the air still carried the hum of ancient energy. The wanderer felt it coursing through him, subtle but insistent, reminding him that the trial with the ancient was not the end. It was only the beginning. He adjusted the dagger at his side, now no longer just a weapon, but a conduit, a tool to channel the energy of the gate with intention and precision. Every step he took felt heavier, yet more purposeful, as if the ground itself recognized his resolve. The watcher floated nearby, expression unreadable but eyes sharp, observing him like a sentinel. The valley was a threshold, it said. Beyond it lies the world that has been shaped by the ancient slumber, a land untouched by mortal hands for centuries. What you encounter will not only test your mastery of the gate's energy, but your understanding of the consequences that come with it. The wanderer nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that he was ready. The path ahead wound upward through jagged cliffs, their surfaces etched with glowing runes that pulsed faintly as he passed. These markings were remnants of a civilization long gone, ones that had attempted to harness the gate's power before succumbing to its overwhelming force. He traced a finger over a rune, feeling its hum vibrate into his bones, an echo of knowledge, a fragment of memory left behind by the ancients. As the sun rose over the valley's edge, light spilling over the horizon, he glimpsed what lay beyond. Vast plains stretching toward jagged mountains, rivers glinting with silver light, forests that seemed to whisper among themselves. But interspersed among this natural beauty were signs of disruption. Craters that burned with residual energy, collapsed cities whose architecture defied logic, and shadows that moved unnaturally, as if aware of him. The first of these shadows approached quickly, coalescing into a humanoid form with jagged edges and a flickering aura. It did not speak, yet the intent was clear. It had been drawn to him, sensing the energy he carried. The wanderer steadied himself, feeling the dagger hum, its light expanding to illuminate the space around him. The shadow struck, swift and relentless, but the wanderer did not flinch. He moved with fluid precision, each motion guided by intuition and the gate's energy. The strike was not only defensive, but transformative. The dagger's glow merged with the shadow, neutralizing its hostility and restoring it to a form of neutral energy that dissipated harmlessly. That is the first lesson of this world, the Watcher said. Not all that appears to be enemy truly is. Many will test you, drawn to your power, but they can be redirected. Your understanding will shape the balance of everything you encounter. Hours passed, though time felt fluid in this strange land. He crossed plains where the wind carried voices of the past, forests where trees bent slightly to guide his path, and rivers that reflected not just his own image, but visions of possible futures. Each step demanded focus, for the energy within him was not static. It interacted with the world, shifting landscapes subtly, awakening both beauty and danger. By the evening, He reached a plateau overlooking a massive city in ruins. Its spires stretched impossibly high, entwined with glowing vines that pulsed with the same energy he felt inside himself. From this distance, he could see movement, figures gathering, some human, some unidentifiable, all drawn to the city as though waiting for him. The watcher hovered closer, voice softer now. This city is a nexus. Here, the remnants of those who tried to master the ancients' power gather. Some seek guidance, others seek dominance. How you engage them will determine whether the gate's energy becomes a tool of creation or destruction. Be wary, for the Shadow Knight's influence lingers, and not all who appear will act in good faith. The Wanderer's gaze hardened. He could feel the weight of the gate within him, a power that demanded responsibility, focus, and courage. The journey had already changed him, his fear replaced by understanding, his doubt tempered by resolve. Ahead lay the unknown, a city that was more than ruins, populated by forces both strange and familiar, where the true test of his abilities and character would unfold. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in hues of fire and gold, he took the first step toward the city, toward the nexus, toward what he now understood was his true purpose: to wield the gate's energy wisely, to confront the legacies of the past, and to shape the fate of the world itself. The night deepened. Around him, alive with whispers and faint pulses of energy. Every shadow held potential, every flicker of light a lesson yet to be learned. The path forward was uncertain, but the Wanderer knew one thing. He would not falter, and he would not turn back. The journey beyond the valley had begun. The city stretched before him like a monument to both ambition and ruin, its spires glowing faintly in the darkness, alive with a strange energy that pulsed in rhythm with his own heartbeat. The Wanderer stepped forward, feeling the gate's power resonate more intensely than ever. Every stone, every vine, every shadow seemed to respond to him, as if the city itself was waiting, aware that its fate and his were intertwined. The Watcher hovered silently beside him, eyes unblinking, giving only the faintest nod of acknowledgement. As he entered the central plaza, he saw them, remnants of the ancient order that had once sought the gate's power. Some were humanoid, others were twisted shapes that shimmered with unstable energy, all drawn by the pulse he now carried. For a moment, hesitation flickered through him. He understood that this was the culmination of every challenge, every lesson, every encounter that had brought him here. The figure stepped forward from the shadows, taller than any human, its eyes burning with recognition. The Shadow Knight. Its presence was an oppressive weight, a force that had lingered in echoes and whispers throughout his journey. It spoke without moving its lips, voice carried directly into the Wanderer's mind. You have come far, but power without understanding is ruin. The gate is not yours to wield as you please. The Wanderer steadied himself, feeling the energy within him surge, shaping itself to his will. I do not seek to wield it for myself, he replied. I seek to restore balance, to end what has been left broken for centuries. Your time of manipulation ends here. The Shadow Knight laughed, a sound that echoed like breaking stone through the plaza. Balance? There is no balance, only cycles of hunger, ambition, and decay. You think yourself a savior? You will see how fragile your resolve is when faced with true power. With a flick of his hand, the Wanderer released the energy of the gate fully, letting it radiate outward. The city shivered and hummed, the ground vibrating beneath the feet of all who stood there. Shadows twisted and writhed as the energy coalesced, revealing their true forms, some benevolent, others monstrous. Yet for the first time, the Wanderer felt no fear. He was no longer reacting. He was orchestrating. He guided the energy with intent, weaving it into patterns of containment, dispersal, and renewal. The Shadow Knight surged forward, an immense wave of darkness and malice. The clash was immediate. The air shimmered with raw power as the gate's energy met the corrupted force head-on. The plaza cracked, light and shadow dancing in chaotic arcs. But the wanderer remained resolute. He remembered every lesson: the valley, the trials, the shadows that could be redirected, the whispers of the past. He drew the energy inward, focusing not on destruction, but on transformation. But a final strike erupted, a pulse of light that enveloped the shadow night completely. Its scream was both terrible and beautiful, a release of centuries of ambition and cruelty. When the light faded, there was nothing left but a calm void, and the city itself seemed to sigh in relief. The twisted energies untangled, structures settling into stability, runes glowing steadily instead of erratically, vines pulsing with life instead of menace. The watcher floated closer. It is done. The cycle is broken. The gate's power stabilized. Your choices have reshaped the world. You have not merely survived. You have guided what was lost back into harmony. The wanderer looked over the city, now bathed in a soft, golden light that came from within itself, as if acknowledging its renewal. He felt the gate's energy recede to a manageable hum, no longer overwhelming but steady, balanced. The trials, the shadows, the long journey, they had all led to this singular moment of clarity and purpose that he stepped toward the highest spire, raising the dagger, not as a weapon, but as a symbol, letting it absorb the last echoes of the chaotic energies. The city responded, a gentle pulse that radiated outward, a silent testament to the restoration he had wrought. He understood, finally, that mastery was not about domination or conquest. It was about understanding, guidance, and the courage to act when no one else could. As dawn broke over the horizon, the wanderer looked outward toward distant lands that might yet need his guidance. But for the first time, he felt peace. The city, the gate, the trials, they were no longer threats, but tools for creation, lessons for the world to remember. He walked from the central plaza, leaving behind the energy and balance, leaving behind the shadows of the past, and stepping into a future shaped not by fear or ambition, but by wisdom, courage, and the enduring strength of purpose. The journey had ended, yet the world continued, transformed forever by the choices of one who dared to walk the path few would ever understand. And as he disappeared into the light of the rising sun, it was clear the story of the gate, of the valley, and of the wanderer would live on, not in fear, but in hope. The end.